Hey guys, tonight we're taking a deep breath and plunging headfirst into the clamorous, dusty, and undeniably pungent world of ancient Ostia Antica. Forget your grand Roman emperors and their marble palaces for a moment. We're stepping back in time to the gritty, tireless heart of Rome's port city, a place built not on imperial decrees but on the sweat, muscle, and sheer, unwavering toil of its working-class residents. Imagine the cacophony, the creak of ropes, the shouts of stevedores, the bleating of livestock, the endless, rhythmic splash of oars, and the unmistakable, pervasive scent of salt, fish, and 1,000 unwashed bodies. It's a sensory overload, a relentless machine of commerce and survival. And honestly, you'd probably last about 3 days before collapsing from exhaustion or succumbing to a Roman stomach bug. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the ancient paved streets of Ostia, just a few miles from the mouth of the Tiber River. The sun, even in the early morning, is already a persistent, unyielding presence, baking the cobblestones beneath your worn sandals. The air is thick, not just with dust kicked up by countless feet and carts, but with the palpable hum of a city perpetually in motion. This isn't the Rome of grand monuments and leisurely senatorial debates. This is the Rome of raw, unvarnished industry, the muscle and sinew that fed the beastly appetite of the empire. You didn't come here for the gladiatorial games, though they had them. You came here to work. Imagine the sheer scale of it. Ostia, at its peak, was home to an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 souls, a bustling metropolis of trade and labor. Historians still argue about the precise population figures for Ostia at its peak, but everyone agrees it was a truly dense urban environment. This was the commercial artery of the Roman world, the indispensable funnel through which flowed everything Rome needed to survive and thrive. Grain from Egypt, oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, exotic spices from the East, it all came through here. And who unloaded it? Who stored it? Who transported it upriver to Rome? The working class of Ostia, that's who. Their lives were a relentless testament to physical endurance and communal reliance, a stark contrast to the distant, often oblivious grandeur of the capital. As you step further into the city, the sounds become more distinct. From the direction of the river, the deep, guttural cries of men hauling ropes echo, punctuated by the sharp crack of whips, not necessarily on backs, but often as signals. The rhythmic clang of hammers from a blacksmith's shop mingles with the high-pitched chatter of merchants haggling over prices, their voices rising and falling like a strange, ancient song. There's the distant lowing of cattle being herded, the bleating of sheep, and the unmistakable, ever-present squawk of seagulls circling overhead, drawn by the promise of dropped scraps from the docks. Your modern ears, accustomed to the muted hum of air conditioning and the polite murmur of a coffee shop, are assaulted by a constant, overwhelming symphony of human and animal activity. It's like living inside a perpetually busy freight terminal, if that freight terminal also served really bad coffee and had no noise regulations whatsoever. The streets themselves are a chaotic dance. Not wide, straight boulevards like Rome's grand avenues, but often narrow, winding pathways, choked with pedestrians, handcarts, and the occasional lumbering ox cart piled high with amphorae. You find yourself constantly dodging, weaving, and politely, or not so politely, pushing your way through the throng. There's a distinct pecking order, of course. A wealthy merchant, perhaps identifiable by his finer toga and the absence of calluses on his hands, might have a slave clear a path for him. But for you, an ordinary Ostian, it's a constant battle for personal space, a concept, frankly, that hadn't really been invented yet. Forget social distancing. In Ostia, you were intimate with your fellow citizens whether you liked it or not. The air itself tells a story. Beneath the salt and the dust, there's the unmistakable tang of fermenting wine from a nearby tavern, the sharp, pungent scent of a fishmonger's stall, perhaps a little too ripe in the midday sun, and the earthy smell of freshly baked bread wafting from a communal oven. Interspersed with these are less pleasant odors, the unwashed bodies of laborers, the faint, acrid smell of charcoal smoke, and the ever-present, though often ignored, aroma of human and animal waste. Sanitation, while surprisingly advanced for the era, wasn't exactly a modern marvel, and the streets, despite being paved, were a constant testament to the city's organic, bustling life. You learn quickly to step carefully, and to hold your breath when passing certain alleys. As you navigate this human tide, you notice the buildings. They aren't the grand, single-family villas of Rome's elite. Instead, they are multi-story apartment blocks, the insulae, towering over the narrow streets, their windows often shuttered against the fierce sun. These are the homes of the vast majority of Ostia's population, a testament to the city's density and the need to house its enormous workforce. On the ground floor, shops and workshops spill out onto the street, their goods laid out for inspection. A baker kneads dough with flour dusting his arms, a cobbler hammers away at a sandal, a potter spins his wheel, shaping clay with practiced hands. These are the small businesses, the lifeblood of the community, often run by families who live directly above their livelihood. The people you encounter are a kaleidoscope of types. Sailors, their faces weathered by sun and sea, their voices rough with countless voyages. Porters, their muscles bulging under heavy loads, their backs bent with years of hauling. Shopkeepers, their eyes sharp with the constant calculation of profit and loss. Enslaved people, their expressions often guarded, performing every conceivable task, from sweeping streets to carrying messages. And freedmen, former enslaved individuals who had earned or bought their freedom, now carving out new lives, often as merchants or skilled laborers, their newfound liberty a fragile but precious thing. The social hierarchy is visible, but the sheer necessity of work binds everyone in a complex, interdependent web. You might be a humble laborer, but without you, the entire system grinds to a halt. It's a strange paradox. The individual is small, but their collective effort is monumental. This is not a city of leisure, at least not in the sense we understand it today. Every movement, every sound, every smell reinforces the central truth of Ostia. It is a city of relentless, physical labor. The very air vibrates with the energy of purpose, of survival, of the constant need to move goods, to process them, to prepare them for their ultimate destination in Rome. You feel the grit under your feet, the dust on your skin, the distant ache in your shoulders just from observing the sheer output of human effort around you. It makes you appreciate your plush sofa and remote control, doesn't it? Just imagine trying to binge-watch anything when your main form of entertainment is watching a guy wrestle a particularly stubborn amphora off a cart. The city itself feels alive, a breathing, sweating entity. The cobblestones are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, the walls of buildings scarred by the passage of countless carts. Every corner seems to hold a new vignette of working life, a group of men gambling with dice during a short break, their laughter sharp and brief. A woman carrying a heavy water jar from a public fountain, her movements graceful despite the burden. A young boy, no older than 10, already learning the ropes of his father's trade, his small hands expertly tying a knot. This is the mundane, the everyday, the unglamorous reality that underpinned the glory of Rome. It's a testament to the fact that empires aren't just built on conquest and grand ideas. They're built, quite literally, on the backs of ordinary people, working day in and day out, making sure the gears of civilization keep turning. And in Ostia, those gears were always turning. Now, as you stand amidst the grand, albeit ruined, brickwork of what would become the bustling port of Ostia Antica, I want you to lean in a little closer, perhaps let your mind drift back even further in time. Forget the multi-story apartment blocks and the paved streets for a moment. We're going to peel back the layers of history, like an ancient, salty onion, to discover Ostia's truly humble beginnings. Because before it was Rome's mighty maritime gateway, before it was a thrumming center of commerce, Ostia was something far more primal, far more essential, a salt-producing outpost, a place where the very survival of Rome began, quite literally, with a pinch. Imagine, if you will, the landscape not as it is today, preserved in archaeological splendor, but as it was millennia ago. You're not seeing grand warehouses or public baths. Instead, your eyes meet a vast, flat expanse of marshy land, kissed by the sun and occasionally drowned by the sea. And snaking through it all, the mighty Tiber River, not the tamed, embanked waterway you might picture in Rome, but a wild, untamed beast of a river, thick with sediment, churning its way relentlessly towards the Tyrrhenian Sea. It's here, at the Tiber's delta, where fresh water met salt water in a perpetual, muddy embrace, that Ostia was born. The river, you see, was Ostia's first parent, its true architect. It was the lifeline, connecting this remote, swampy outpost to the nascent city of Rome, some 20 kilometers upstream. And it was the river, along with the sea, that provided the raw material for Ostia's very first industry, salt. Now you might scoff a little, thinking, salt? Really? That's it. But trust me, in the ancient world, salt wasn't just a seasoning you sprinkled on your dinner because your chef had an off day. It was gold. It was currency. It was, quite simply, the difference between life and death for millions. Picture the scene, the relentless Mediterranean sun beating down on shallow, man-made basins, dug into the marshy ground. These were the salini, the salt pans. You can almost feel the sticky, humid air, taste the briny spray on your lips. The process was deceptively simple, yet brutally laborious. Tidal waters would be allowed to flood these shallow pools, then the gates would be closed, trapping the seawater. The sun, Rome's ancient, tireless energy source, would do the rest, slowly evaporating the water, leaving behind glistening white crystals. It was, in essence, an early form of solar farming, but instead of growing vegetables, they were growing pure, unadulterated sodium chloride. And it was absolutely vital. Why so vital, you ask? Well, cast your mind back to a time before refrigerators, before freezers, before canning or even proper glass jars. How did you preserve food? How did you keep meat from spoiling in the sweltering Italian summer? Salt. You salted your fish, you cured your pork, you preserved your vegetables. Without salt, Rome, a growing city with a burgeoning population and a hungry army, would have starved. It was the ancient world's most effective, and often only, preservative. Imagine trying to feed a legion of soldiers on a long campaign without salted rations. It would have been a logistical nightmare, and probably quite smelly. So yes, the humble salt pans of Ostia were directly responsible for keeping Rome fed, its legions marching, and its citizens, well, not dying of food poisoning. It sounds a bit dramatic, I know, but sometimes history is just that dramatic. The very word, salary, in fact, comes from the Latin salarium, which referred to the salt allowance given to Roman soldiers. So, when you get your paycheck today, you can thank the sweat and toil of those early Ostian salt harvesters for contributing to the linguistic lineage of your earnings. It's a fun little linguistic quirk, isn't it? A testament to just how valuable this white gold truly was. These early workers, likely a mix of soldiers, enslaved people, and perhaps some hardy free laborers, would have toiled under the relentless sun, raking the salt, piling it high, and then loading it onto small, flat-bottomed boats called naves caudicari. These weren't the grand seagoing vessels we'll discuss later. These were river-going workhorses, designed to navigate the often treacherous and always muddy Tiber, slowly, painstakingly ferrying the precious cargo upstream to Rome. You can almost hear the rhythmic splash of oars, the grunts of the laborers, and the distant cries of gulls blending with the buzzing of mosquitoes, because let's be honest, where there's marsh, there are mosquitoes. Lots of them. Now, Ostia's earliest days are shrouded in a bit of historical mist, as is often the case with truly ancient origins. Tradition, particularly the Roman historian Livy, tells us that Ostia was founded by the fourth king of Rome, Ancus Marcius, in the 7th century BC. He supposedly established it as a fortified outpost, primarily to secure the salt pans and control the mouth of the Tiber. Whether this is precisely true, or a convenient origin myth, scholars continue to argue whether Ostia's primary function was solely salt production or if it also served as an early naval base from its very inception. Was it just about the salt, or was it also about projecting Roman power onto the sea lanes, even in their nascent form? The truth, as ever, is probably a bit of both. But what is undeniable is that its strategic location at the river's mouth, where the Tiber emptied into the vast, open sea, made it indispensable. Imagine what life must have been like for these early Ostians. This wasn't a city yet, not by a long shot. It was a collection of rudimentary huts, perhaps a small fort, and the sprawling, shimmering salt pans. The air would have been thick with the smell of brine and marsh gas. The sounds would have been the lapping of the river, the calls of seabirds, and the constant, rhythmic scrape of tools against salt. There would have been no grand temples, no bustling markets, no fancy taverns. Just the relentless cycle of the tides, the sun, and the back-breaking work of harvesting salt. It was a frontier existence, a testament to the sheer will and need of early Rome. These were the true salt of the earth. People, quite literally. The Tiber itself was a character in this early drama. It was the highway to Rome, but it was also a capricious master. It flooded regularly, sometimes devastating the salt pans and the rudimentary settlements. It constantly shifted its course, depositing silt, slowly but surely reshaping the coastline. It demanded respect, and those who lived by its banks learned to live with its whims. You couldn't just order the Tiber to behave, much like you can't convince your cat to stop knocking things off the shelf. It just is. And its muddy, brown waters were a constant reminder of its power and its connection to the distant capital. So, as you mentally peel back those layers of time, you're left with a stark, simple image, a small, hardy community, clinging to the edge of the land, wresting sustenance from the sea and the sun. Their days were dictated by the tides and the weather, their purpose clear, to provide the essential ingredient that kept Rome alive. They were the unsung heroes of ancient Roman logistics, the quiet backbone of an empire that was just beginning to dream of its vastness. And it all started here, with a few shallow pools of salt water, and the tireless hands that harvested its precious bounty. It's a far cry from the bustling port, isn't it? But every great city, every grand story, has a small, unassuming beginning. And for Ostia, that beginning was etched in salt and river mud. You've just begun to grasp Ostia's humble beginnings, a simple outpost born from salt and the Tiber's gentle flow. But now, let's widen our gaze, because upriver, a beast was stirring, growing ever larger, ever hungrier. That beast, of course, was Rome. Imagine a city, a burgeoning metropolis, expanding faster than its citizens could count, its population swelling like a rising tide. This isn't just about a few extra mouths to feed. This is about an empire, vast and insatiable, demanding resources, luxuries, and the very sustenance of life for millions. And suddenly, those modest salt flats and small river docks of Ostia weren't just useful. They became utterly, undeniably essential. Rome, you see, was like a constantly running furnace, needing fuel, always more fuel. Its legions marched further, its population soared, and its elite developed taste for the exotic and the extravagant. They didn't just need basic grain to make their daily bread, though that was paramount. They craved fine olive oil from Hispania, rich wines from Gaul, precious timber from distant forests, and gleaming marble from quarries across the Mediterranean. They wanted spices that could only be found in the distant east, exotic animals for their games, and delicate textiles woven in lands you could barely imagine. Think of it less as a humble port and more as the ancient world's busiest distribution center, a kind of Amazon Prime, but with less clicking and an awful lot more manual labor. And all of it, almost without exception, had to pass through Ostia. The transformation was, in a word, dramatic. What started as a trickle of goods arriving on small barges and coastal vessels soon became a steady stream, then a powerful, relentless river of commerce. Ostia, sitting perfectly at the mouth of the Tiber, became Rome's indispensable funnel, its primary gateway to the vast network of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a natural choke point, yes, but also a magnificent conduit. Suddenly, ships of all sizes, from every corner of the known world, laden with every imaginable commodity, began to converge on this once quiet stretch of coastline. You can almost feel the shift in the air, the subtle hum of increasing activity. The simple wharves of the salt trade, built for modest needs, were utterly inadequate for this new reality. So you witness a flurry of construction. First, more robust wooden jetties extend into the river, then sturdy stone quays begin to line the banks. The waterfront, once a muddy, natural shoreline, transforms into a hive of perpetual motion. Imagine the constant creak and groan of thick ropes straining against mooring posts, the rhythmic splash of oars as smaller boats ferry goods, and the boisterous shouts of stevedores, their voices echoing across the water. The air fills with the scent of salt, wood, and 1,000 different cargoes, a heady perfume of global trade. But where do all these precious commodities go once they're offloaded? They can't simply pile up on the docks, exposed to the elements or opportunistic hands. This pressing need led to the construction of vast, imposing structures known as horia, the Roman warehouses. These aren't just flimsy sheds, mind you. Many are multi-story, fortified buildings, some even equipped with internal courtyards for light and ventilation, almost like ancient, colossal storage units, though perhaps without the modern climate control. Though, to be fair, storing olive oil and grain in the Mediterranean heat without some form of cooling sounds like a job for a very brave, or very desperate, warehouse manager. These horia were the beating heart of Ostia's storage capacity, meticulously organized, designed to protect and manage the empire's vital supplies. All this incredible activity, of course, required people. Lots of people. Merchants arrived, eager to strike deals, sailors docked, looking for a brief respite, and a vast army of laborers, from dockworkers and porters to artisans, shopkeepers, and administrators, flocked to Ostia seeking work. You can almost feel the population density increasing around you. What was once a relatively modest town began to swell into a bustling, vibrant city, its streets growing ever more crowded, its rhythm accelerating. People poured in from the surrounding countryside, from Rome itself, and from overseas, drawn by the promise of opportunity in this rapidly expanding port. As the population burgeoned, so did the cityscape itself. The growth wasn't just confined to the port facilities, it radiated outwards. The need for housing became acute, leading to the construction of multi-story apartment blocks. Shops, taverns, bakeries, and workshops sprang up to serve the new influx of residents. Public buildings, baths, and administrative offices were erected, reflecting Ostia's growing importance. The city began to sprawl beyond its original core, swallowing up agricultural land and smaller settlements, transforming the very landscape around it. It was organic, yes, but also very much directed, a testament to Roman planning and pragmatic ingenuity. This incredible expansion wasn't merely a natural economic phenomenon, it was actively facilitated, even orchestrated, by successive Roman emperors. They understood, with stark clarity, that Ostia was the very lifeline of Rome. The mainstream historical fact here is that Emperor Claudius, in the mid-1st century CE, initiated the construction of a massive new artificial harbor, Portus, just north of Ostia. This ambitious project, later significantly expanded by Trajan, was designed to handle larger ships, reduce congestion, and mitigate the persistent problem of the Tiber's silting mouth. These imperial investments were colossal undertakings, requiring vast resources and engineering prowess, transforming the very geography of the coastline to secure Rome's food supply. The scale of this imperial port, once fully developed, was truly breathtaking. It wasn't just a single dock, it was a complex, interconnected system. Imagine a network of docks, basins, canals, towering lighthouses guiding ships safely to shore, and sprawling administrative buildings overseeing the flow of goods. The sheer volume of cargo passing through Ostia was staggering. Consider the logistics involved, coordinating hundreds of ships, thousands of workers, and millions of tons of goods, all without modern technology, without computers, without even a simple telephone. It was a masterpiece of ancient supply chain management, albeit one powered by muscle and meticulous record-keeping. As you wander through the imagined streets, you notice the incredible diversity of goods and, more importantly, people. Ostia became a true melting pot, a microcosm of the Roman Empire itself. Goods arrived from the fertile plains of Egypt, the olive groves of North Africa, the silver mines of Spain, the vineyards of Gaul, the artistic centers of Greece, and the bustling trade hubs of Asia Minor. And with the goods came the people who produced, transported, and traded them. You'd hear a cacophony of languages: Latin, Greek, Egyptian, Punic, Aramaic, and see an incredible array of faces, clothing, and customs. It was a truly global city, long before the term was invented. Ostia, therefore, wasn't just a port, it became the economic heart valve of the Roman Empire. If Ostia faltered, if the flow of grain or olive oil was interrupted, Rome itself would quickly face starvation and unrest. This vital role placed immense pressure on the city and, crucially, on its working-class citizens, who bore the brunt of ensuring that Rome's insatiable appetite was always satisfied. Their tireless efforts kept the empire fed, clothed, and supplied, a burden they carried day in and day out. Of course, such rapid and unprecedented growth didn't come without its challenges. Overcrowding became a significant issue, leading to cramped living conditions and strained resources. Sanitation, despite Roman ingenuity, was a constant battle in such a dense urban environment. Crime, always a companion to boomtowns, likely saw an uptick. Managing such a diverse and rapidly expanding population, with all its different cultural practices and expectations, was a monumental task. It was, in many ways, like a modern boomtown that suddenly exploded, but without the benefit of zoning laws or health inspectors. One can only imagine the ancient equivalent of a building code violation. If you could somehow float above the city and look down, you would see the result of this transformation, a dense, sprawling urban landscape. A grid of streets, some narrow and winding, others broad and paved, crisscrossed the city. Multi-storied buildings, public squares, temples, and the sprawling port complex itself would dominate the view. It was a testament to Roman engineering, organization, and sheer ambition, even if, at ground level, it often felt like a chaotic, bustling beehive. The city itself was a machine, constantly churning, constantly expanding. And within this immense growth, there are always those fascinating, quirky details that bring the past to life. For instance, did you know that some of the massive amphorae used to transport goods like wine or olive oil were so large and robust that, after their contents were consumed, they were sometimes repurposed as simple, humble coffins for the less affluent citizens of Ostia? Talk about recycling. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that speaks volumes about the practical, no-waste mentality that often defined working-class life. Meanwhile, historians still argue whether the silting of the Tiber, a constant geographical challenge, was a primary cause that necessitated the construction of new, deeper harbors like Portus, or simply an inevitable geographical reality that forced the hand of emperors to constantly innovate and expand their port infrastructure. So Ostia, the modest salt-producing outpost, was utterly transformed. It became the indispensable artery, the vital conduit through which the very lifeblood of the Roman Empire flowed. It's a story of necessity, ingenuity, and relentless expansion, all driven by Rome's insatiable hunger for goods and resources. You can almost hear the low hum of a city that never truly slept, constantly receiving, constantly sending, forever changed by the demands of the empire it served. Imagine, if you will, the faintest hint of dawn, a pearly gray light just beginning to diffuse through the small, unglazed window of your cramped room. You're not waking to the chirping of birds, mind you, but to the symphony of a city already stirring. From your perch, perhaps on the 4th or 5th floor of an insula, one of those multi-story apartment blocks we'll chat about more later, you hear it all. The distant bray of a donkey, the low rumble of an ox cart already making its way along the main thoroughfares, the rhythmic clatter of a baker's shutters being thrown open, and the ever-present, low hum of human voices. It's a soundscape that tells you, without the need for a pesky alarm clock, that it's time to rise. Your body, aching from yesterday's toil, protests, but the sun, that ancient timekeeper, waits for no one. You swing your legs over the edge of your simple pallet, the straw rustling beneath you. The air is cool, often damp from the nearby Tiber, carrying with it the faint, mingled scent of wood smoke, stale cooking oil, and something less pleasant that you've long since learned to ignore. There's no elaborate morning routine here. A quick splash of water from a shared basin, perhaps a piece of hard bread left over from last night's meager supper, and you're pulling on your simple tunic. For many, that's it. No fancy breakfast spreads, no leisurely sips of coffee. Just the raw, unvarnished start to another relentless day. Stepping out of your building is like entering a human tide. The narrow streets of Ostia Antica, especially in the early hours, are already a swirling vortex of activity. You join the flow, a tiny eddy in the grand river of humanity, all heading towards their respective duties. The paving stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and cartwheels, are slick with morning dew and whatever refuse has accumulated overnight. You weave through a veritable obstacle course, a sleepy dog curled in a doorway, a vendor already setting up his stall with a pyramid of fresh figs, a group of women heading to the public fountains with heavy water jars. The air hums with the low murmur of conversation, the occasional sharp cry of a hawker, and the rhythmic slap 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 of sandals on stone. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of rush hour, only with more donkeys and fewer sarcastic honks. Your destination depends on your trade, of course, but for most Ostians, it's a place of physical exertion and long hours. If you're a Sicarius, a stevedore, your path leads inevitably towards the pulsating heart of Ostia, the docks. Even from a distance, you can hear it, the cacophony of the port. The creak of massive cranes, the shouts of foremen, the rhythmic splash of oars, the thud of heavy amphorae being unloaded from ships that have just arrived, their bellies full of grain, wine, olive oil, and exotic goods from across the Mediterranean. This is where Rome's insatiable appetite is fed, and you are one of the cogs in that colossal machine. As you reach the quayside, the scale of the operation becomes overwhelming. Ships, both large seagoing vessels and smaller river barges, jostle for space. The air is thick with the smell of brine, fish, and the dry, dusty scent of grain. Your muscles tense in anticipation, already knowing the strain they are about to endure. Your job is simple, yet backbreaking, to carry sacks. Great, heavy sacks, often weighing up to 70 kilograms, that's about 150 pounds, for those keeping score at home, filled with the very wheat that will feed Rome's millions. You hoist the rough canvas onto your shoulder, the coarse fabric scratching against your tunic, the weight immediately pressing down on your spine. One foot in front of the other, a slow, laborious shuffle from the ship's hold to the waiting warehouses. Again and again. Under the watchful eyes of the mensors, the official weighers, who ensure every grain is accounted for. There are no forklifts here, no conveyor belts, just raw human power. It's like an ancient Roman version of CrossFit, but with less spandex and a far more immediate risk of a hernia. You learn to walk with a peculiar, rolling gait, distributing the weight, trying to lessen the inevitable ache that will settle in your shoulders and lower back by midday. Perhaps you are not a dockworker, but a miller or a baker. Your day begins even earlier, often well before dawn, in the stifling heat and dust of the flour mills. The rhythmic grind of the millstones, turned by donkeys or, more rarely, by enslaved laborers, fills the air. Your hands are perpetually coated in fine white flour, your lungs accustomed to the dusty environment. You oversee the milling, ensuring the grain is perfectly ground, then move to the bakeries, where the massive brick ovens are already roaring. The heat is intense, the air thick with the yeasty aroma of rising dough. You knead, you shape, you load the loaves into the scorching depths of the oven, your face flushed, your forearms slick with sweat. By the time the rest of Ostia is having its meager breakfast, you've already produced hundreds of loaves, the very staff of life for this bustling city. It's a repetitive, hot, and physically demanding job, but the satisfaction of seeing those golden brown loaves emerge, ready to feed the masses, is undeniable. Or maybe your skill lies in craftsmanship. You might be a blacksmith, the clang of your hammer against hot iron echoing through your small workshop. The smell of charcoal and scorching metal fills your nostrils. You spend your day shaping tools, repairing carts, perhaps even forging decorative grills for a wealthier merchant's home. The work requires precision, strength, and an intimate knowledge of your materials. Or you're a potter, your hands covered in clay, spinning the wheel, coaxing elegant forms from humble earth. The constant hum of the wheel, the cool, wet feel of the clay, the focus required to keep the form true. It's a different kind of labor, but equally demanding on your body and your concentration. Mainstream historical fact * the sheer volume of grain that passed through Ostia was staggering. It's estimated that during its peak, Ostia handled enough grain to feed Rome's population of over 1 million people, requiring hundreds of ships and thousands of laborers daily. This continuous flow was absolutely critical to the stability of the Roman Empire, as a hungry Rome was a rebellious Rome. Throughout the morning, the city around you continues its frenetic dance. Carts rumble past, laden with goods, their drivers shouting warnings. Pedestrians jostle, their conversations a low hum. The air fills with the smells of baking bread, roasting meat from a thermopolium, a sort of ancient fast food stand, the pungent aroma of fish from the market, and the ever-present, less appealing scent of the city's drains. You might catch snippets of gossip, a merchant haggling loudly, or the distant strains of music from a temple procession. It's a sensory overload, a constant reminder of the vibrant, sometimes overwhelming, life of Ostia. Midday brings a brief, often unceremonious, respite. A pause in the relentless grind. For many, it's a simple meal eaten on the go, perhaps a piece of bread, some cheese, a few olives, washed down with a gulp of water or cheap wine. There are no long lunch breaks, no elaborate staff canteens. You might snatch a few moments of shade, leaning against a rough brick wall, watching the endless stream of people and goods. The sun is high now, beating down on the city, and the heat can be oppressive, especially in the summer months. The dust seems to shimmer in the hot air. The afternoon mirrors the morning's toil. The muscles that were merely aching now burn. The repetitive motions become a dull throb. The mind, too, begins to weary. For the Sicarius, each sack feels heavier than the last. For the baker, the oven's heat seems more intense. For the artisan, the hand cramps, the eyes strain. It's a testament to human endurance, the sheer will to keep going, day in and day out, to earn enough to survive. Quirky tidbit * many workers, especially those in physically demanding jobs like the Sicarii, would often wrap their lower legs in strips of cloth, called fasciae, not just for warmth, but to provide support and reduce swelling, much like modern compression socks. Imagine the ancient Roman version of athletic tape, but made from linen and probably less sticky. As the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the pace of work might slacken slightly, but it rarely stops entirely until darkness truly falls. Streetlights are a luxury few can afford, and working by lamplight is inefficient and costly. The sounds of the city begin to change. The shouts of vendors become less urgent, the clatter of carts less frequent. People are heading home, their bodies slumped with fatigue, their minds already turning to the promise of a simple meal and a few hours of sleep before the cycle begins anew. You trudge back through the winding streets, the air cooler now, the shadows long and deep. The smells of evening cooking, stews, roasted fish, garlic, replace the day's more industrial aromas. The city, though still alive, feels calmer, more intimate. You might pass by a collegium hall, one of the workers' guilds, where members gather for an evening meal or discussion. Or perhaps you catch the distant strains of music from a small tavern. The thought of collapsing onto your pallet is the only thing driving you forward. Open scholarly debate * historians still debate whether the daily working hours in Ostia, and indeed across the Roman Empire, were strictly regulated, or if they varied significantly based on trade, season, and the specific demands of the job. Some evidence suggests a typical Roman workday might have been shorter than modern ones, but the intensity and physical demands were often far greater. Your day, from the first hint of light to the deepening twilight, has been a testament to relentless labor. It's a life dictated by the sun, the needs of Rome, and the unyielding demands of survival. There's little time for grand philosophy or artistic pursuits. Your hands and back are your life, and your daily bread is earned through the sweat of your brow. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. So, you've been navigating the crowded arteries of Ostia, dodging merchants and their carts, inhaling the salty air mixed with something less pleasant but undeniably human. You've seen the docks, the shops, the public squares. But where do all these people go when the sun dips low, or when they just need a moment of respite from the relentless hustle? Well, you don't head to a sprawling villa with manicured gardens, not unless you're one of the incredibly wealthy few. No, for the vast majority of Ostia's working souls, home is an insula. Imagine, if you will, the Roman equivalent of a modern apartment block, but with a good deal more character, and perhaps a few more surprises. These insulae, the Latin word literally means island, because they often stood as self-contained blocks surrounded by streets, were the beating heart of working-class life in Ostia. They were typically multi-story structures, rising 2, 3, sometimes even 4 or 5 floors above the street level. Forget quaint cottages. These were the high-rises of the ancient world, packed with people, packed with stories, and frankly, packed with a lot of noise. You approach one now, perhaps after a long day hauling grain sacks or shaping pottery. The ground floor, as you might expect, isn't residential. Instead, it's lined with tabernae, shops and workshops, their wide, open doorways spilling light and the smells of baking bread, freshly cut wood, or perhaps just ancient Roman street life, which had its own unique bouquet. You might see a baker pulling loaves from an oven, a cobbler hammering away at sandals, or a tavern keeper already serving up the evening's watered wine. These shops often doubled as the living quarters for the shopkeepers themselves, tucked away in a small room behind the counter or on a mezzanine level above. It was the ultimate live-work space, long before anyone coined the term. As you step inside, leaving the clamor of the street behind, you find yourself in a communal entranceway, perhaps leading to a central courtyard. This courtyard, often open to the sky, serves as a vital lung for the building, letting in precious light and air to the surrounding apartments. It's here you might see children playing, laundry drying on lines strung between windows, or women chatting while fetching water from a shared cistern or fountain if the insula was lucky enough to have one. This is where the community part of insula living really shines. You're not just living next to people, you're living with them. Your lives are intertwined, for better or for worse. It's like living in a very large, very noisy, and very public family. Now let's ascend. Staircases, often narrow and steep, made of wood or stone, wind their way up the building. As you climb, you notice how the light diminishes, and the air can become a little closer. The apartments themselves, known as sanacula, are typically small, often consisting of just 1 or 2 rooms. Imagine a space barely large enough for a bed, a small chest, and perhaps a brazier for warmth, or a bit of cooking. Privacy, as we understand it today, was a luxury most Ostians simply didn't have. Walls were thin, and sounds traveled freely. If you thought your modern apartment walls were thin, Ostian insulae walls practically whispered your neighbor's deepest secrets, and their arguments about who left the chamber pot out. The conditions, for many, were undeniably cramped. Think about it, an entire family, sometimes an extended one, living in a single room or 2. There were rarely private kitchens within the individual apartments. Instead, residents would rely on communal hearths in the courtyard, or, more commonly, purchase their meals from the numerous thermopolia and taverns scattered throughout the city, a concept we'll definitely dive into later. And private latrines? Forget about it. You'd either use a shared public latrine block, which, surprisingly, could be quite social places, or, for a simpler solution, a chamber pot, the contents of which would eventually be emptied into the street below, or perhaps a communal waste shaft. Ah, the charming aromas of ancient urban living. This close proximity, while fostering a strong sense of community, also came with significant drawbacks. Fire, for example, was a constant, terrifying threat. These buildings, often constructed with a mix of brick, concrete, and a lot of wood, floors, ceilings, staircases, were highly combustible. A dropped lamp, an unattended cooking fire, or even just a spark could engulf an entire insula in minutes. Once a fire started, especially on an upper floor, there was often little hope of escape or containment. Building codes? Oh, they had them. But let's just say structural integrity sometimes felt more like a hopeful suggestion than a hard rule, especially when a landlord was trying to squeeze in one more floor for profit. Indeed, the quality of construction could vary wildly. While some insulae in Ostia were built with sturdy brick and concrete, others, especially those hastily erected to meet the demands of a rapidly growing population, were less robust. This leads us to a fascinating point of scholarly discussion. There's still scholarly discussion on how effectively Roman building codes, designed to prevent collapse and fire, were enforced in a bustling port like Ostia, often leading to a perilous existence for residents. Did the city magistrates truly keep a close eye on developers, or did the need for housing outweigh concerns for safety? Given the constant pressure for space and the profit motive, it's easy to imagine corners being cut. Despite the challenges, the noise, the lack of privacy, the ever-present threat of fire or collapse, these insulae were home. They were where families were raised, where friendships were forged over shared meals or whispered conversations across narrow corridors. You learned to live with the sounds of your neighbors, the smell of their cooking, and the general ebb and flow of communal life. Personal space was less a concept and more a fleeting dream. You knew your neighbors better than your own reflection, often whether you wanted to or not. The highest floors, incidentally, were often the cheapest, and therefore the least desirable. Why? Because they were the furthest from the street, meaning more stairs to climb, and they were also the most vulnerable to the elements, and, crucially, to fire. Water had to be carried up, and waste had to be carried down. Imagine living on the 5th floor of an Ostian insula with no elevator and no running water. Your daily routine would involve a significant amount of vertical cardio. It's a mainstream historical fact that insulae were the predominant form of urban housing for the vast majority of Rome's and Ostia's population, often reaching several stories high and clearly distinguishing the life of the average citizen from the privileged few who could afford a private domus. So, as you stand in the quiet ruins of an insula today, look up at the remaining walls, trace the outline of a doorway, or imagine the narrow staircases. You're not just seeing ancient brick and mortar, you're seeing the echoes of countless ordinary lives. You're seeing where the stevedores slept after a long day on the docks, where the baker's children played in the courtyard, where the laundress hung her clothes to dry. It was a life of hardship, certainly, but also one of resilience, community, and the simple, enduring human need for a place to call home, however cramped or precarious. As the sun climbs higher over Ostia Antica, painting the insulae in shifting shades of gold and ochre, your stomach begins to rumble. You've been up since before dawn, perhaps already hauling sacks or grinding grain, and the morning air, though cool, carries the promise of a long, arduous day. Sustenance isn't just a comfort here, it's the absolute fuel for survival, the very thing that keeps the gears of this bustling port city turning. And for the working class of Ostia, that sustenance largely revolved around one humble, yet mighty, staple: grain. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer logistical marvel of feeding a city like Rome, and by extension, its vital port. Rome, with its hundreds of thousands of mouths, relied almost entirely on imported grain, and Ostia was the funnel through which most of it poured. You can practically taste the dust of it in the air, a constant reminder of the city's purpose. Massive ships, their bellies swollen with wheat from Egypt, North Africa, and Sicily, would dock along Ostia's quay, their arrival a cause for both relief and renewed labor. The Annona, Rome's intricate system of grain supply and distribution, was a lifeline, ensuring that even the poorest citizens had access to the basic caloric necessities. This was a mainstream historical fact that shaped the very fabric of Roman society. The emperors knew that if the people were hungry, they would be restless. So, the grain flowed. Once unloaded, often by gangs of stevedores like yourself, the grain wouldn't just sit on the docks. It was destined for the enormous horia, the granaries of Ostia. These weren't your quaint little farm silos. These were monumental structures, vast complexes of storerooms, often multiple stories high, with thick walls and raised floors to protect the precious cargo from damp and vermin. You might have worked inside one of these, the air thick with the smell of dry wheat, the sound of scurrying mice a constant background hum. Picture long rows of immense ceramic jars, called dolia, embedded in the floor, each one holding enough grain to feed a small village for a week. Or perhaps you were involved in the milling process, the rhythmic creak and groan of donkey-powered mills a constant soundtrack to your days, transforming the hard kernels into flour. It's hard work, dusty work, the kind that coats your clothes and fills your lungs, but it's essential. Without this grain, there is no bread, and without bread, there is no Ostia. Your own daily intake of grain would predominantly come in the form of bread. Not the fluffy, artisanal loaves you might find in a modern bakery, but dense, coarse, often dark bread, baked from whichever quality of flour was available. It was the foundation of almost every meal, sometimes eaten plain, sometimes dipped in olive oil or accompanied by a handful of olives or a piece of cheese if you were lucky. It was sustenance, pure and simple, providing the energy needed for another day of hauling, building, or trading. And if bread wasn't on the menu, then a thick, nourishing porridge made from ground grain was a common substitute. It really makes you appreciate your morning toast, doesn't it? Though, to be fair, Ostian bread was probably a lot more filling. But even the most dedicated worker can't live on bread alone, no matter how hearty. And this is where the lively thermopolia and taverns come into play, the beating heart of Ostia's working-class culinary scene. These weren't fancy restaurants, with linen tablecloths and hushed conversations. Oh no. Think of them as the ancient world's answer to fast food joints and bustling pubs, scattered seemingly on every street corner, a beacon of hot food and cheap wine after a long day. You can practically hear the cacophony of voices, the clatter of pots, and the general hubbub spilling out onto the narrow streets. Stepping into a thermopolium, literally a place where hot things are sold, you're immediately hit by a symphony of smells: simmering stews, frying fish, the yeasty tang of wine, and the general aroma of 1,000 meals being prepared and consumed. The main feature is usually a long masonry counter, often beautifully decorated, with large, embedded ceramic jars, *dolia*, from which hot food and drinks were served. You'd point to what you wanted, perhaps a hearty lentil stew, some chickpeas, or a portion of boiled vegetables, all kept warm over charcoal fires. Sometimes there would be small pieces of grilled fish or sausages, though meat was a luxury for many. It was quick, it was convenient, and most importantly, it was affordable. You wouldn't linger for hours here. It was a grab-and-go experience, or at most, a quick stand-up meal at the counter. It's the ancient equivalent of grabbing a hot dog from a street vendor, just with more toga-wearing patrons. The atmosphere was rarely serene. These were places of loud chatter, laughter, and sometimes heated arguments. They were social hubs where news was exchanged, gossip was shared, and the day's frustrations could be momentarily forgotten. You'd rub shoulders with fellow dockworkers, artisans, shopkeepers, and sailors from distant lands, all united by the common need for a cheap meal and a drink. The wine, often watered down to make it go further and reduce its intoxicating effects, or perhaps just make it more palatable, depending on the quality, flowed freely. It wasn't the finest vintage, but it did the trick. Some of these establishments even had small back rooms, hinting at more clandestine activities, perhaps a quick game of dice or a hushed business deal. It's a quirky tidbit to think that these ancient fast food joints were also sometimes illicit gaming dens. The Romans really knew how to multitask. Taverns, or coponi and papini, were similar but often offered a bit more in terms of seating and a wider range of services, sometimes even basic lodging for travelers. Imagine a dimly lit room, perhaps with a few wooden benches and tables, the air thick with smoke from oil lamps and cooking fires. Here you might linger a little longer, sipping your wine, playing a game of tabula, a Roman board game similar to backgammon, or just unwinding after a grueling shift. The food would be similar to the thermopolia, simple, hearty fare designed to fill you up without emptying your coin purse. One of the great mysteries, or perhaps just a point of endless fascination for historians, is the precise nature of the daily diet for the average working Ostian. Historians still argue whether the grain dough provided sufficient calories for a demanding physical labor, or if the thermopolia were truly supplemental, or essential, to meet the energy needs of the working class. It's a question of numbers, of logistics, and of understanding the true grind of daily life. What is certain is that these establishments were absolutely vital. They weren't just places to eat, they were community centers, places of refuge, and a testament to the ingenuity of a society that understood the fundamental need to feed its engine, its people. So, as you finally sit down, or perhaps just lean against the wall, with your bowl of hot stew and a cup of watered wine, you feel a deep sense of satisfaction. It's not gourmet, It's not fancy, but it's warm, it's filling, and it's enough. And as you listen to the chatter around you, the clinking of cups, and the distant rumble of carts, you realize that this simple act of eating is a fundamental thread connecting you to every other working soul in Ostia, from the dockworker to the baker, all fueled by the same grain, all seeking respite in the same bustling taverns. It's a simple pleasure, but sometimes those are the best kind. You've navigated the bustling streets, squeezed into your tiny apartment, and perhaps grabbed a quick bite at a thermopolium. But as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, a different kind of warmth draws you in, the warmth of community, of shared purpose, of belonging. For the working class of Ostia Antica, life wasn't just about individual struggle. It was profoundly shaped by collective solidarity, by the vital embrace of the collegia, the workers' guilds. Imagine, if you will, the sheer weight of daily existence. The back-breaking labor, the ever-present threat of illness, the gnawing anxiety of old age, the sudden tragedy of death. Who would care for your family if you fell ill? Who would ensure a dignified burial if you passed? Who would stand up for your rights when a wealthy merchant tried to shortchange you? In Ostia, as in much of the Roman world, the answer often lay not with a distant emperor or a cold bureaucracy, but with your collegium. These guilds were far more than just professional associations. They were the social safety net, the networking hub, and the spiritual anchor for countless Ostians. Think of them as a blend of a modern trade union, a social club, an insurance policy, and a religious fraternity, all rolled into one ancient, very Roman package. When you joined a collegium, you weren't just signing up for a job perk, you were effectively adopting a new family, a brotherhood or sisterhood, though the latter were less common for workers' guilds, alas, that would stand by you through thick and thin. Let's step inside a typical guild hall, perhaps that of the Corpus Pastorum, the Bakers' Guild, located conveniently near the Forum of Corporations. You push open a heavy wooden door, and immediately, your senses are enveloped. The lingering scent of yeast and warm bread, a faint whisper of wood smoke from the nearby ovens, mixes with the earthy smell of old stone and the metallic tang of freshly minted coins being counted. The air hums with conversation, a low murmur of voices discussing grain prices, new oven designs, or perhaps the latest gossip from the docks. Imagine the soft clinking of terracotta cups as members share a glass of watered wine, the gentle crackle of a small brazier in the corner providing warmth on a cool evening. This isn't just a meeting place, it's a second home. The most fundamental support the collegia offered was often the most somber, a proper burial. In a world without state-sponsored welfare or modern funeral homes, dying without resources was a terrifying prospect. Many guilds operated a funeraticium, a burial fund. Members paid regular dues, and in return, they were guaranteed a dignified funeral, often with a procession, a modest tomb or niche in a columbarium, a communal burial chamber, and even a commemorative feast for the surviving family. This was not merely about respect for the dead. It was a profound act of comfort for the living, alleviating one of life's greatest anxieties. It really takes the funeral dirge out of funeral arrangements, doesn't it? Knowing someone else would handle the messy bits. Beyond the grave, guilds provided crucial social support. If a member fell ill and couldn't work, other members might contribute to help their family. Widows and orphans of deceased members could often receive a small stipend or assistance finding new employment. Guilds organized regular banquets and feasts, often on the feast days of their patron deities, fostering camaraderie and strengthening bonds. These weren't just meals, they were elaborate social rituals, featuring fine food, by Ostian standards, anyway, wine, music, and sometimes even entertainment. Imagine a group of dockworkers, after a day of hauling heavy amphorae, sitting down to a meal of roasted pork and communal wine, the rough edges of their day softened by shared laughter and the easy companionship of their peers. It was a chance to kick off your sandals, metaphorically speaking, and just be. But the collegia weren't just about potlucks and post-mortem arrangements. They were also crucial for professional identity. In a city teeming with workers, your guild membership proudly declared your skill, your trade, your place in the intricate economic tapestry of Ostia. The mensores frumentarii, the official grain measurers, for instance, were a highly respected and influential guild. Their work, meticulously ensuring accurate measurements of the grain arriving from across the Mediterranean, was absolutely critical to Rome's food supply. Their guild hall, with its intricate mosaic depicting grain measures and ships, was a testament to their professional pride and importance. When you saw a mensa in the streets, you knew they were part of a vital, respected profession. It was like having a very specific, ancient LinkedIn profile, but with better networking opportunities and definitely more wine. This sense of identity extended to quality control and training. Guilds often set standards for their craft, ensuring a certain level of skill and preventing shoddy work from devaluing their profession. Apprenticeships were often overseen by the guild, ensuring that new generations learned the trade correctly. This wasn't just about maintaining reputation, it was about ensuring a stable, skilled workforce for Ostia's complex economy. And then there was the collective power. While Roman society was undeniably hierarchical, and open rebellion by workers was rare and severely punished, the collegia still wielded significant influence. They could act as a collective voice to negotiate with merchants, ship owners, or even the municipal authorities. Imagine the navicularii, the shipowners' guild, collectively bargaining for better rates on harbor services, or the lanuncularii, the lighter men who ferried goods from large ships to the shore, refusing to work for exploitative wages. This wasn't a strike in the modern sense, but a unified withdrawal of labor could certainly get attention. Mainstream historical fact *, the sheer number and diversity of collegia in Ostia Antica is a testament to their importance. Inscriptions and archaeological finds revealed dozens of different guilds, from the obvious ones like bakers, pisters, and carpenters, fabri tignuarii, to the more specialized, like the urinators, divers who salvaged goods from shipwrecks, or the stupators, caulkers who sealed ship hulls. This widespread organization of labor was a fundamental characteristic of Roman urban life, especially in busy port cities like Ostia. The guilds also had a subtle, yet undeniable, political dimension. While they weren't explicitly political parties, their collective membership represented a significant block of voters, for those who were citizens, and a source of organized social power. Wealthy patrons, seeking influence or popularity, might donate to a guild or sponsor a guild feast, knowing that such generosity would earn them goodwill and potential support. Some historians still argue whether some collegia had significant political clout beyond their immediate professional interests, perhaps even influencing local elections or advocating for specific public works projects that benefited their trade. It's a fascinating debate, trying to discern the exact balance between social cohesion and political leverage in these ancient associations. Let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit: the Corpora Omnium Mercatorum, or the Guild of All Merchants. Seems almost comically broad, yet it existed in Ostia. It suggests a powerful overarching body that might have coordinated the interests of various smaller trading guilds, or perhaps served as a general association for those who didn't fit neatly into a single, specialized category. Imagine their meetings. Right, so the fishmongers are complaining about the price of ice, the textile sellers are grumbling about wool quality, and the olive oil importers just want a faster turnaround at the docks. Can't we all just get along and make some denarii? It paints a picture of a bustling, sometimes chaotic, but ultimately organized economy. Membership in a collegium was typically open to freeborn citizens and, crucially, to freedmen, former enslaved people who had gained their freedom. For freedmen, joining a guild was often a vital step in integrating into Roman society, providing them with a professional identity, a social network, and a path to economic stability that might otherwise be denied to them. Even some enslaved people were allowed to join certain guilds, particularly those whose skills were valuable to their masters, though their rights and benefits would have been more limited. Dues were paid regularly, often on a monthly basis, and the guild's finances were managed by elected officials, often highly respected members who had proven their integrity. These officials would oversee the common fund, organize events, and represent the guild's interests. Religion, as always in Roman life, was deeply intertwined with the guilds. Each collegium typically had a patron deity, Vulcan for the firemen, Mercury for merchants, Ceres for the grain measurers, and so on. Guild halls often contained shrines or altars where members could offer prayers and sacrifices. Religious festivals specific to their trade were celebrated with pomp and ceremony, reinforcing the shared identity and spiritual bonds of the members. Imagine the Bakers' Guild offering fresh loaves to Ceres, goddess of grain, hoping for a bountiful harvest and perfectly risen bread. It was a fusion of the practical and the spiritual, acknowledging that success in their craft depended not only on skill and hard work but also on divine favor. So, as you drift off to sleep, consider the profound impact of these collegia. They were the unsung heroes of Ostia's working class, providing not just a paycheck, but a sense of belonging, a safety net, and a collective voice in a world that could often feel impersonal and harsh. Their halls echoed with laughter and debate, their altars witnessed countless prayers, and their shared meals forged bonds that transcended the daily grind. They were the beating heart of Ostia's labor force, ensuring that even in the face of hard work, no one had to face it entirely alone. As you drift through the imagined streets of Ostia, you've seen the bustling markets, the cramped insulae, and the ever-present hum of labor. But imagine for a moment what it was like to live in such a densely packed city without modern plumbing or sanitation. The very thought might make you, well, a little uncomfortable. Yet Ostia, like many Roman cities, was remarkably advanced for its time when it came to water and public health. It's a testament to Roman engineering that, even among the working classes, there was a concerted effort to keep things, if not pristine, then at least functional and relatively clean. Your journey into Ostia's public hygiene begins with the lifeblood of any Roman settlement, water. You hear the faint gurgle, the steady flow that whispers of engineering marvels. Fresh, clean water wasn't just a luxury for the wealthy elite. It was an essential public utility, meticulously managed to serve the entire city. A mainstream historical fact you simply must appreciate is the sheer scale of the Roman aqueduct system. From miles away, sometimes even dozens of miles into the surrounding hills, multi-tiered stone aqueducts, like colossal veins, snaked across the landscape, carefully graded to allow gravity to carry millions of gallons of pristine spring water directly into the heart of Ostia. Imagine the sheer dedication, the precise surveying, the backbreaking labor involved in constructing these magnificent conduits, all to ensure that every fountain, every bathhouse, every public latrine had a constant, reliable supply. No need for a Brita filter here, folks. This water was the real deal, straight from the mountains. Though I wouldn't recommend drinking directly from the lead pipes, just in case. Once inside the city walls, this precious water wasn't just dumped into a central reservoir. It was thoughtfully distributed through a complex network of lead and terracotta pipes, branching out to serve various public facilities. You'd find public fountains, often beautifully decorated, dotted throughout the neighborhoods, providing easy access to potable water for everyone, from the lowliest dockworker to the most esteemed merchant. These fountains weren't just functional. They were social hubs, places where you'd pause, fill your amphora, and perhaps exchange a few words with a neighbor before continuing your day. The steady trickle of water from these spouts would have been a constant, soothing soundtrack to daily life in the busy port. But the true marvel of Ostia's water system, and indeed its public health infrastructure, lay in its public baths. For the working-class Ostian, the public bathhouse wasn't just a place to get clean. It was a cornerstone of daily life, a social club, a gym, and even a library, all rolled into one steamy, bustling complex. After a long day hauling grain sacks or negotiating deals down at the Forum of Corporations, the baths offered an indispensable escape, a chance to shed the grime of labor and relax. You approach one of the larger bath complexes, perhaps the Baths of Neptune, named for the magnificent mosaic of the sea god gracing its floor. The air immediately feels warmer, heavier with moisture, and carries a faint scent of olive oil and human activity. You pay a small entrance fee, often affordable, sometimes even free, thanks to wealthy benefactors, and step inside. First, you'd enter the apoditerium, the changing room. Here, you'd shed your simple tunic, perhaps stashing your belongings in a small niche in the wall. No lockers with combination codes here, just trust, or maybe a watchful eye from a friend. From there, you might head to the palestra, an open-air courtyard surrounded by columns. This wasn't just a place to warm up, it was where you'd exercise. Imagine the sounds, the thud of wrestling bodies, the clang of weights, the shouts of men playing ball games. It was a proper ancient gym, though perhaps without the same emphasis on personal space as your modern fitness center. You might oil your body, perhaps with a cheap, unperfumed olive oil, preparing your skin for the heat to come. Imagine trying to get your steps in here, probably more like trying to avoid slipping on someone else's discarded oil. Next, you'd move through a series of heated rooms. The tepidarium, a warm, humid room, served as a transition space, allowing your body to gradually acclimate to the increasing heat. You'd linger here, perhaps chatting with acquaintances, letting the gentle warmth begin to loosen your muscles. Then, the main event, the caldarium, the hot room. Stepping in, you're enveloped by intense heat and thick steam, generated by a sophisticated underfloor heating system called a hypocaust. Hot air from furnaces circulated beneath the floor and through hollow tiles in the walls, creating a natural sauna effect. Here, you'd sweat profusely, and with the help of a strigil, a curved metal scraper, you'd scrape off the mixture of sweat, oil, and dirt from your skin. It was surprisingly effective, if a little gross when you think about it. Finally, after enduring the intense heat, you'd plunge into the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool. The shock of the cold water would be bracing, invigorating, snapping you back to alertness after the languid warmth of the caldarium. This rapid change in temperature was believed to be good for circulation and general well-being. After this refreshing dip, you might relax in one of the communal areas, perhaps reading or engaging in lively conversation. The baths were true social melting pots, where people from all walks of life, from merchants to freedmen, could interact and unwind. Now let's address the less glamorous, but equally vital, aspect of Ostia's public health, the latrines. Roman communal latrines might initially seem, shall we say, a little too communal for modern sensibilities. But for their time, they were quite innovative. You find yourself in a large, often beautifully decorated room, perhaps with marble seats. A long, continuous stone or marble bench runs along the walls, with neatly spaced holes cut into it. Underneath this bench, a constant stream of fresh water flowed, carrying waste away into the sewer system that ultimately emptied into the Tiber River. You sit down, side by side with your fellow Ostians, on one of these public commodes. There's no privacy here, no stalls, just open conversation. It was a place for gossip, for business deals, for simply passing the time. It might sound strange, but this was a common social setting. Here's a quirky tidbit that often raises eyebrows: for personal hygiene after doing your business, there was no toilet paper. Instead, Romans used a tersorium, which was essentially a sponge attached to the end of a stick. This sponge was communal, kept in a bucket of water, sometimes salted or vinegared, for everyone to use. Don't worry, it was sort of rinsed. Probably. While certainly more hygienic than simply squatting in the street, the communal sponge is a stark reminder of the differences in ancient and modern sanitation practices. Despite these impressive systems, historians still debate the true impact of these communal facilities on overall public health and the spread of disease. While the constant flow of water in the latrines and the emphasis on washing in the baths certainly improved general cleanliness compared to many other ancient societies, the lack of understanding of germ theory meant that communal sponges, shared bathing water, and close quarters could also have inadvertently facilitated the transmission of certain ailments. Did the benefits outweigh the risks? That's a complex question, one that scholars continue to explore by examining skeletal remains for evidence of disease and analyzing the archaeological record. Ultimately, Ostia Antica stands as a remarkable example of Roman ingenuity in managing the challenges of urban living. The intricate network of aqueducts, the luxurious and accessible public baths, and the surprisingly functional communal latrines all speak to a society that, despite its limitations, prioritized public hygiene and the well-being of its citizens, even its working class. These systems, though ancient, were far from primitive, representing a significant step forward in urban sanitation and truly shaping the daily lives of the ordinary Ostian. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long, tired shadows across the bustling docks and narrow alleyways, you feel the day's relentless grind etched into every muscle. The salt spray, the dust from the grain, the sweat of your brow, it all clings to you, a testament to another day's labor. But now, as the evening chill begins to creep in, your thoughts drift from the weight of your burdens to the promise of something else, respite. Once you've scrubbed away the grime of the day at the public baths, a luxury that truly feels like a necessity after hours of hauling, your mind turns to the simple, yet profound, question, what now? For the working-class Ostian, leisure wasn't a sprawling, endless vacation, but rather a precious collection of stolen moments, a brief exhale before the next lung-burning exertion. It was the antithesis of the docks, the shops, the constant clamor of commerce. It was where you found your humanity again, away from the demands of the Roman machine. Perhaps you head towards the Grand Theater, its semicircular embrace a familiar sight against the evening sky. This isn't some grand, marble-clad coliseum for gladiatorial spectacles that draw the emperors themselves. This is Ostia's own, a more intimate, though still impressive, venue for the everyday citizen. You join the meandering stream of people, a mix of dockworkers, shopkeepers, bakers, and their families, all eager for a few hours of distraction. The air hums with chatter, the scent of stale wine and cheap perfumes, and the distant, ever-present murmur of the sea. You find a spot on the stone seating, perhaps a little uncomfortable, but perfectly positioned to catch the action. Tonight, it might be a raucous comedy, a fabula togata, with exaggerated masks, slapstick humor, and plots that are as predictable as the tides, yet still manage to elicit groans and guffaws from the crowd. The actors, often freedmen or even slaves, throw themselves into their roles, their voices booming across the open-air space. You might see a bumbling husband, a scheming slave, or a lovesick youth, all navigating the absurdities of Roman life, often with a wink and a nod to the audience. It's a collective experience, a release valve for the day's frustrations. The jokes are often crude, the plot simple, but the shared laughter is genuine. You might even catch a mime performance, where stories are told through gesture and music, no words needed, which is perfect after a day of shouting orders or haggling prices. It's a mainstream historical fact that the theater in Ostia was a hugely important public venue, capable of holding thousands of spectators, providing accessible entertainment for almost everyone. But theater wasn't the only option, nor was it an everyday occurrence for many. For most, leisure was far more informal, woven into the fabric of daily life. Picture yourself ducking into a familiar thermopolium or tavern, not just for a quick bite, but for the company. The air is thick with the smell of cheap wine, garlic, and human warmth. Here you pull up a stool, or lean against the counter, and the real entertainment begins, conversation. Gossip about the latest ship to arrive, complaints about the price of grain, boasts about a particularly shrewd deal, or simply the sharing of stories and laughter among friends. And then there are the games. Not the grand, organized spectacles, but the simple, pervasive games of chance and skill. You might see a group huddled around a worn wooden table, the clatter of tali, knucklebones, echoing through the smoky room. These ancient dice, often actual animal bones, are thrown with fervent hope and muttered curses. The stakes might be small, a few asses, a round of drinks, or just bragging rights, but the thrill is real. It's a quirky tidbit that many taverns had game boards etched directly into their tables or even into the pavement outside, ready for an impromptu match of tabula lusoria, a game remarkably similar to modern backgammon. You slide your counters across the board, strategizing, blocking, and occasionally, with a triumphant grin, sending your opponent's pieces flying. "That's how you do it, Marcus!" you might exclaim, as if you just outmaneuvered Hannibal himself. Beyond the taverns, the public spaces themselves offered a form of leisure. A leisurely stroll through the forum of corporations, even after hours, was a chance to see and be seen, to soak in the fading light on the grand buildings, to listen to the lingering echoes of the day's commerce. The porticos offered shade and shelter, perfect for lingering conversations. The public baths, as we've discussed, weren't just for hygiene. They were social clubs, places to catch up on news, to network, to relax in the warm waters, and maybe even engage in some light exercise or a friendly wrestling match in the palestra. It was a place where social hierarchies could, for a brief moment, seem a little less rigid, as everyone stripped down to their most basic form. For those with a bit more energy, informal athletic contests might spring up. A foot race down a less crowded street, a game of catch with a ball made of inflated animal bladder, or even a friendly, if slightly clumsy, wrestling bout. These weren't organized Olympic events, but spontaneous bursts of physical release, a way to channel pent-up energy after a day of repetitive motion. Children, of course, were masters of finding leisure in anything, chasing each other through the streets, playing with simple wooden toys, or engaging in games of tag amidst the ruins of older buildings. Religious festivals, while fundamentally spiritual, also offered significant opportunities for communal leisure. Processions through the streets, banquets hosted by the various collegia or guilds, and public feasts provided a chance for the community to come together, to celebrate, and to momentarily forget their daily struggles. These events often blurred the lines between sacred and profane, offering both spiritual solace and a good excuse for a party. Your guild, the Collegium Pastorum, Baker's Guild, might hold an annual feast where the wine flows freely, and the bread is, for once, not for selling but for sharing. Even the simple act of people watching was a cherished pastime. Finding a spot near the bustling Decumanus Maximus, Ostia's main thoroughfare, and simply observing the endless parade of humanity, merchants, sailors, soldiers, slaves, freedmen, women with their shopping baskets, was a quiet, contemplative pleasure. It was like an ancient version of scrolling through social media, but with far more fresh air and less digital eye strain. Historians still debate whether the concept of leisure time, as we understand it, truly existed for the working poor, or if it was more about snatching moments between chores and necessities. But what is undeniable is the human need for release, for connection, for joy, however fleeting. These were the simple pleasures that punctuated the relentless rhythm of work, the small pockets of freedom that allowed the working-class Ostian to endure, to connect, and to find a sense of belonging in a world that often demanded so much. They were the moments that made life worth living, a gentle counterpoint to the city's unceasing industrious hum. You've navigated the bustling streets, you've imagined the cramped insulae, you've even tasted the ancient Roman equivalent of a greasy spoon breakfast. But as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the port, something else becomes apparent. Something that wasn't just about where you lived or what you ate, but what you believed. Because in Ostia Antica, life, work, and faith were so intertwined, they were practically inseparable. Imagine the air, thick not just with the scent of salt and fish, but also with the faint, sweet smell of incense wafting from countless doorways. You see small altars tucked into niches, flickering oil lamps casting dancing shadows on the walls. This wasn't just a place of commerce. It was a deeply, profoundly spiritual city. Your day, from the moment you woke, was punctuated by little acts of piety. Before you even stepped out to face the chaotic docks, you'd likely have paused at your lararium, your household shrine. This little shrine, often just a painted niche or a small shelf, was the heart of your home's spiritual life. Here you'd offer a pinch of salt, a few drops of wine, or a bit of food to the Laras, the guardian spirits of your household, and the Penates, who protected your pantry and provisions. It was a very practical sort of spirituality, really. You weren't asking for enlightenment, you were asking for your bread not to go moldy, for your children to stay healthy, and for your business ventures not to sink with the next stormy sea. It was like a daily check-in with your cosmic insurance policy. And honestly, with all the risks of ancient life, who could blame them? You'd probably do the same. Dear Laras, you'd murmur, please ensure my morning commute isn't too crowded today. Beyond your home, the gods were everywhere. The very fabric of the city was woven with their presence. Grand temples dedicated to the Capitoline Triad, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, stood as majestic symbols of Roman state religion, much like the impressive Capitolium that dominates the Forum. These were the big hitters, the gods of empire, of law, and of the Roman state itself. Public ceremonies, sacrifices, and festivals would have been grand affairs, drawing crowds, reminding everyone of their place in the vast Roman cosmos. It was a spectacle of civic pride and religious duty, all rolled into one. You might not understand all the Latin, but you'd certainly feel the gravitas. But for the working people of Ostia, faith wasn't just about grand state rituals. It was deeply personal, incredibly diverse, and often, surprisingly adaptable. This port city, a melting pot of cultures, brought with it a veritable smorgasbord of deities from across the Roman world. If you were feeling spiritually adventurous, Ostia was the place to be. It was like ancient Rome's version of a spiritual shopping mall, with every cult imaginable vying for your devotion. And among the most fascinating and ubiquitous of these imported faiths was the cult of Mithras. You might stumble upon a Mithraeum, the underground temple dedicated to this Persian god, almost anywhere in Ostia. In fact, Ostia boasts more Mithraea than any other site in the Roman Empire, a testament to its popularity here. You descend a few steps, leaving the bright Mediterranean sun behind, and suddenly you're in a cool, dark, cavern-like space. Stone benches line the sides, where initiates would recline for their sacred meals. At the far end, a central relief depicts the Tauroctony, Mithras, clad in a Phrygian cap, slaying a bull, often accompanied by a dog, a snake, a raven, and a scorpion. It's a powerful, enigmatic image. Mithraism was a mystery cult, meaning its rituals and beliefs were kept secret from outsiders. It appealed particularly to men, especially soldiers, merchants, and even freedmen, exactly the kind of working-class individuals who populated Ostia. It offered a sense of brotherhood, a clear moral code, and the promise of salvation or a favorable afterlife. Imagine, after a grueling day unloading ships or haggling in the forum of corporations, descending into the quiet sanctity of a Mithraeum. The flickering lamps, the hushed voices, the shared meal, the sense of belonging to something ancient and profound, it must have been incredibly comforting. It was like the original underground club, but instead of techno music, you had cosmic revelations. But Mithras wasn't the only foreign deity to find a home here. The Egyptian goddess Isis, along with her consort Serapis, also had a strong following. You'd find their temple, perhaps adorned with Egyptian motifs, a vibrant splash of exoticism in the Roman landscape. The cult of Isis was known for its elaborate processions, its promise of rebirth, and its appeal to both men and women. If Mithras was the stoic, masculine ideal, Isis offered a more emotional, nurturing spiritual path. Then there was Cybele, the Magna Mater, the great mother from Phrygia, whose cult involved wild, ecstatic rituals, sometimes even including self-castration, though thankfully, that particular practice became less common over time, much to the relief of aspiring priests, I imagine. And tucked away in a corner of the city, you'd even find the oldest known synagogue in Europe, a testament to Ostia's thriving Jewish community, who maintained their distinct monotheistic faith amidst the polytheistic hubbub. Mainstream historical fact * the sheer number and variety of public temples and private shrines in Ostia Antica clearly demonstrate that religious practice, both civic and personal, was an absolutely central and ubiquitous aspect of daily life for all social classes. It wasn't just for special occasions, it was woven into the very fabric of existence. This incredible diversity of belief systems highlights a fascinating aspect of Roman religion, its syncretism. Romans were generally quite open to adopting foreign gods into their pantheon, especially if those gods seemed to offer something valuable. It wasn't about exclusive loyalty to one deity. It was about honoring the gods who could best assist you in your specific circumstances. If you were a sailor, you'd pray to Neptune, but you might also offer a prayer to Isis for a safe voyage, and perhaps even light a candle to a local patron deity of your guild. It was a more the merrier approach to the divine. Quirky or fringe tidbit *, did you know that some of the Mithraea in Ostia, like the one beneath the Baths of Mithras, were built directly over earlier structures? In fact, the Mithraeum of the Seven Spheres has a mosaic floor depicting the 7 planetary spheres and symbols of the different grades of initiation, which is quite detailed and unique. It's not just a simple altar, It's a cosmic map for your spiritual journey. For the working class people, these religious communities, especially the collegia, guilds, we talked about earlier, often had their own patron deities and their own small shrines. The bakers might venerate Ceres, goddess of grain, while the stevedores might have a special affinity for Hercules, known for his strength. These religious affiliations weren't just about piety. They fostered a powerful sense of community and identity. Your fellow worshippers were often your colleagues, your neighbors, your support network. They were the ones who would help you if you fell ill, who would contribute to your funeral expenses, and who would share a meal and a laugh after a long day. Religion wasn't just a belief system, it was a social glue. And what about the big questions? Life in Ostia was hard. Infant mortality was high, disease was rampant, and a bad harvest or a shipwreck could ruin you. So, what did these diverse faiths offer in the face of such relentless uncertainty? They offered comfort, certainly. They offered a framework for understanding the inexplicable. They offered hope for a better afterlife, or at least a peaceful transition. They offered rituals to mark life's big moments, births, marriages, deaths. They provided a sense of order in a chaotic world. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these mystery cults in Ostia, particularly Mithraism, indicated a growing dissatisfaction with traditional Roman state religion, or if they simply offered a more personal, emotional, and communal spiritual experience that complemented, rather than replaced, the public civic cults. It's a fascinating debate. Were people ditching Jupiter for Mithras, or just adding Mithras to their divine Rolodex? Ultimately, the religious landscape of Ostia Antica was a vibrant, ever-shifting tapestry, reflecting the diverse origins, hopes, and fears of its working-class population. From the humble offerings at a household shrine to the solemn rituals in a hidden Mithraeum, faith permeated every aspect of life. It was a source of strength, community, and meaning in a world that demanded much from its inhabitants. As you imagine the flickering lamps and the hushed prayers, you realize that even in the most mundane of lives, there was always room for the divine. You stand now, not in the quiet contemplation of a temple or the boisterous camaraderie of a bathhouse, but at the very pulsing heart of Ostia Antica, its shipping and commerce hub. This isn't just a place, it's a symphony of ceaseless activity, a grand, gritty ballet of goods and gold, sweat and ambition. Imagine the air, thick with the tang of salt and brine, the sweet scent of exotic spices, the unmistakable aroma of fish, and the earthy dampness rising from the Tiber. It's a sensory overload, yet strangely intoxicating, a testament to the fact that Rome, the mighty empire, truly ate what Ostia shipped. You've heard of Rome's insatiable appetite, right? Well, Ostia was the kitchen door. And the docks, oh, the docks. They weren't just a few planks nailed together. Picture the extensive riverine quays stretching along the Tiber, a labyrinth of stone and timber where countless smaller river barges, called lanunculi, jostle for position. These smaller craft are the arteries of the port, ferrying goods from the larger seagoing vessels, the corbeti, anchored in the deeper waters or further out in the artificial harbors built later. You can almost feel the rhythmic creak of ropes, the slap of water against hulls, the constant, low hum of 1,000 conversations in 12 different languages. Look closer, past the immediate chaos. You see the Horia, Ostia's vast warehouses, stretching back from the riverfront like silent, stoic sentinels. These aren't just glorified sheds, they are sophisticated storage facilities, some multi-storied, designed to keep grain, oil, wine, and countless other commodities safe from rodents, dampness, and opportunistic pilferers. Imagine the sheer volume of stuff that passed through here. If you were playing a historical version of Tetris, trying to fit all the incoming amphorae of olive oil into these spaces, you'd probably give up and just go to a thermopolium for a drink. It's a logistical marvel, really, considering they didn't have forklifts or even decent accounting software. The types of trade flowing through Ostia are as diverse as the people you've encountered. At the absolute top of the list, towering above all else, is grain. Rome, with its millions of mouths to feed, relied almost entirely on imported grain, primarily from Egypt. Without Ostia, Rome would starve. You see the massive sacks being offloaded, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight, the strong backs of stevedores straining under the weight. But it's not just grain. There's olive oil, flowing in vast quantities in those distinctive pointed amphorae, destined for cooking, lamps, and even bathing. And wine, of course, from every corner of the Mediterranean, from the sweet wines of Greece to the robust vintages of Gaul. You might even catch a whiff of a particularly strong vintage that makes you wonder if ancient Romans had hangovers as bad as yours. Beyond these staples, the docks are a treasure trove of the exotic and the mundane. You might see marble from Carrara, destined for grand imperial buildings or wealthy villas. Timber from the forests of Gaul and Germany, crucial for construction and shipbuilding. Pottery, fine and coarse, from workshops across the empire. And then, the true luxuries, silks from the distant east, spices from Arabia and India, cinnamon, pepper, frankincense, their aromas mingling deliciously with the more industrial smells of the port. You might even spot a cage containing a wild animal, perhaps a lion or a leopard, being brought in for the gladiatorial games in Rome, looking utterly bewildered by its new surroundings. It's a reminder that even the most extravagant Roman spectacles began right here, with a weary animal being unloaded from a ship. But the physical docks are just one part of the story. To truly grasp the commercial heart of Ostia, you must walk a little further, beyond the immediate grime and clamor of the quays, into a place that feels a bit more organized. You find yourself in the Piazzale delle Corporazioni, the Forum of Corporations. Picture a large, open square, surrounded on three sides by a portico, and in the center, the remains of a temple to Ceres, goddess of grain, because, naturally, grain was that important. This square is the ancient equivalent of a modern stock exchange, a bustling convention center, and a major business district all rolled into one. Under the portico, you see small offices, or stations, each belonging to a different collegium, a guild or corporation of merchants. What makes this place truly fascinating, truly unique, are the mosaics laid into the pavement in front of many of these offices. These aren't just pretty patterns, they are ancient advertisements, business cards, and declarations of trade, all in mosaic form. You walk over them, tracing your steps across the symbols of ancient commerce. You see a mosaic depicting a lighthouse and ships, clearly belonging to the shipowners' guild. Another shows grain measures and sacks, marking the office of the grain merchants. There are rope makers, their symbol a coiled rope. There are tanners, represented by a hide. You might even spot the mosaic of the negotiators aberarii, the ivory merchants, or a guild dealing in specific types of wine. This extensive collection of mosaic floor plans, each depicting the trade of a specific collegium, is a mainstream historical fact, providing invaluable insight into Ostia's economic structure. It's like browsing in ancient yellow pages, except much more artistic and a lot less likely to give you a paper cut. One of the more quirky or fringe tidbits you might stumble upon is the mosaic of the negotiators' navicularii elephantarii, the elephant shipowners. Yes, you read that right. Elephants. Imagine the logistical nightmare of shipping an elephant across the Mediterranean. It makes you wonder if they had a special insurance policy for accidental trunk-related damage to the ship. It's a testament to the sheer breadth of goods and services required by the Roman Empire, even if it does sound like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Within these stations, the real business of the empire took place. You can almost hear the low murmur of negotiations, the clinking of coins, the scratch of styluses on wax tablets as contracts are drawn up. Merchants from all over the Mediterranean would gather here, Egyptians, Greeks, Syrians, Gauls, Africans, haggling over prices, arranging shipments, securing loans, and dealing with all the inevitable ancient supply chain issues. Imagine trying to track a shipment of grain from Alexandria when the only tracking system is a guy with a scroll and a really good memory. It puts modern logistics into perspective, doesn't it? Historians still debate the exact legal nature and power of some of these corporations represented in the Forum of Corporations mosaics. Were they strictly regulated state entities, powerful private monopolies, or something in between? How much influence did they wield over the city's economy, and even its politics? The truth is likely a complex tapestry, varying from guild to guild, reflecting the fluid and often pragmatic nature of Roman administration. What is clear, however, is that this place was the nexus where the world's goods met Rome's demand. The Forum of Corporations wasn't just a place for big, international deals. It was also where local Ostian businesses found their footing. Artisans, shopkeepers, and transporters all had their representatives here, ensuring the smooth flow of goods from the docks into the city's markets and beyond. Every type of trade imaginable, from the grand import of exotic animals to the humble sale of a fish, had its roots, its connections, its paperwork, right here in this bustling square. It's where fortunes were made and lost, where reputations were built, and where the daily grind of commerce underpinned the very existence of Ostia and, by extension, Rome itself. You linger, absorbing the energy, the quiet echoes of 1,000 forgotten transactions. The sheer scale of it all, the intricate web of supply and demand, the human effort involved in moving mountains of goods across continents and seas, it's truly astounding. This was the engine room, the beating heart, the very reason Ostia existed. You've navigated the bustling forum of corporations, seen the mosaic floors that advertise the wares of merchants from across the known world, and perhaps even imagined the frantic haggling over a shipment of Egyptian papyrus or Spanish olive oil. But now, as the sun creeps higher, let's peel back another layer of Ostia's everyday life, venturing beyond the grand statements of commerce into the gritty, sweat-soaked reality of work. This isn't about the merchant prince making deals, but the calloused hands that made those deals possible. This is the true grind, the relentless rhythm of manual labor that formed the very backbone of Ostia's economy. Imagine yourself, if you will, as a sicarius, a stevedore, a dockworker. The very name, from sacus meaning sack, tells you everything you need to know about your primary tool and your most frequent burden. You wake before dawn, perhaps in your cramped insula, the air already thick with the promise of humidity. A quick bite of bread, a swig of watered wine, and you're off, trudging towards the docks, your muscles already anticipating the strain. The air down by the Tiber is a chaotic symphony of shouts, creaking ropes, the splash of water, and the lowing of oxen. The smell, oh, the smell! A potent blend of salt, fish, damp timber, unwashed humanity, and the sweet, dusty aroma of thousands upon thousands of sacks of grain. It's a smell that will cling to your clothes, your hair, even your very skin, long after you've left the docks. Your shift begins as a ship, perhaps a colossal grain freighter from Alexandria, slowly nudges its way to the quay, guided by shouting helmsmen and the rhythmic chants of rowers. This isn't the gentle, automated unloading of a modern container ship, mind you. This is raw brute force. You and your fellow sicarii are the human cranes, the forklifts, the conveyor belts. You clamber aboard, your bare feet finding purchase on the rough planks. The hold is a cavernous, dimly lit space, often suffocatingly hot, even in the cooler months. Here the grain, the very lifeblood of Rome, lies in massive heaps or tightly packed sacks. You grab a sack. It's heavy. So heavy. Perhaps 50, 60, even 70 pounds of durum wheat. You hoist it onto your shoulder, the rough fabric scratching against your tunic, the weight settling onto your spine. Then you begin the slow, deliberate trek, up from the ship's hold, across the gangplank, and into the vast, echoing horia, the imperial warehouses that line the waterfront. These aren't just sheds. They're monumental structures, some with dozens of rooms, designed to store enough grain to feed a city of 1 million people for months. Think of them as ancient, multi-story Amazon fulfillment centers, but without the robots. Or the air conditioning. Or the coffee breaks. Your only break is when a supervisor isn't looking, and you can lean against a cool stone wall for a precious moment. The process is repeated, hundreds, thousands of times a day. Sack after sack, grain for the Roman populace, flowing through your hands, across your shoulders. And it wasn't just grain. Imagine unloading amphorae filled with olive oil from Hispania, each one slippery and fragile. Or massive blocks of marble from Carrara, requiring ropes, levers, and the coordinated grunt of a dozen men. Or perhaps even cages containing wild animals destined for the gladiatorial games. Imagine the roars, the stench, the sheer terror of handling a lion or a bear that has just endured weeks at sea. It truly puts the daily grind into perspective, doesn't it? One mainstream historical fact you can certainly appreciate is that the sheer logistical scale of this operation, moving millions of modi of grain each year, was a feat of ancient engineering and human endurance that sustained the entire Roman Empire. Without these sicarii, Rome would have starved. Beyond the docks, the sounds of industry shift, but the intensity of labor remains. Ostia hums with the activity of artisans, the skilled craftspeople who turned raw materials into the goods that fueled daily life. You might walk past a baker's shop, the aroma of fresh bread wafting out, tantalizing your empty stomach. Inside, the baker and his apprentices would be kneading dough, stoking the massive brick oven, their faces flushed from the heat. The pastrinum, or bakery, wasn't just a place to buy bread, it was a production line, often with its own millstones powered by donkeys or even enslaved people, grinding the grain that you, the sicarius, had so laboriously unloaded. Further down the street, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer on anvil would draw your ear. Sparks would fly as the smith shaped iron into tools, hinges, nails, or even decorative grills for the wealthier homes. The heat, the noise, the sheer physical strength required to wield a heavy hammer all day, it was another world of demanding labor. Or perhaps you'd pass a fuller's workshop, where woolen cloth was cleaned and treated. This involved treading on cloth in vats of water mixed with fuller's earth and even human urine, a fantastic source of ammonia for bleaching and degreasing. The smell, as you can imagine, was memorable. A quirky tidbit: the fullers were so essential, and their process so specialized, that they often had their own dedicated areas, sometimes even with public latrines conveniently located nearby to collect their prime cleaning agent. Talk about recycling! Then there were the potters, throwing clay on their wheels, shaping amphorae, bowls, lamps, and tiles. The carpenters, sawing and planing timber for roofs, doors, and furniture. The mosaicists, painstakingly laying tiny tesserae to create intricate patterns on floors and walls. Each craft, each workshop, represented a microcosm of specialized skill and ceaseless effort. These artisans, often organized into collegia or guilds, weren't just making things, they were building the city, piece by laborious piece. And what about the shopkeepers, the tabernarii? Their work might seem less physically demanding than that of a stevedore or a blacksmith, but it was a different kind of grind. Imagine running a small shop, a taberna, in Ostia. Your shop is probably just a single room, opening directly onto the street, with a sturdy wooden counter and shelves packed with your wares. Perhaps you sell lamps, or pottery, or perhaps you're a butcher, your meat hanging in the open air, attracting flies and customers in equal measure. Your day would be long, starting at dawn to prepare your goods, sweep the floor, and set up your display. You'd spend hours on your feet, haggling with customers, weighing goods on scales, counting out coins. There's no point-of-sale system here, no barcode scanners. Every transaction is manual, personal, and often involves a fair bit of theatrical negotiation. You'd need to be sharp, quick with numbers, and even quicker with a smile, or a stern look, depending on the customer. You'd also have to manage your inventory, dealing with suppliers, ensuring you had enough stock to meet demand but not so much that it spoiled or went unsold. The competition would be fierce. Every street in Ostia was lined with shops, each vying for the denarii of the passing crowds. You'd shout out your wares, trying to entice potential buyers away from your neighbor. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven! Or, finest olive oil from Bietica, just arrived! It was a constant performance, a vocal marathon. And you'd be dealing with all sorts of people, the wealthy matron, the hurried sailor, the curious child, the grumbling laborer. Each interaction unique, each demanding your full attention. You were the face of commerce, the direct link between the vast imperial supply chain and the individual consumer. Even the humble thermopolium owner, serving hot food and drinks, faced their own daily challenges. Imagine constantly tending the fire, keeping the food warm, ladling out stew or wine, washing countless cups and bowls, all while dealing with boisterous crowds and perhaps the occasional drunken sailor. It was a relentless cycle of preparation, service, and cleanup, often extending late into the evening. Historians still argue whether the tabernarii were truly working class, in the same sense as the sicarii. Many were freedmen, having gained their freedom and perhaps a small amount of capital to start their own business. Some might have been relatively well off, while others struggled to make ends meet, living hand to mouth. The lines between artisan, shopkeeper, and even small-scale merchant were often blurry, with many individuals performing multiple roles. But what unites them all is the sheer daily effort, the physical and mental stamina required to simply exist and earn a living in this bustling, demanding port city. So, as you drift off tonight, remember the sicarius with aching shoulders, the baker with flour dusting his hair, the shopkeeper with tired feet. Their stories, though often unwritten in the grand histories, are etched into the very stones of Ostia Antica. They were the engine of Rome's prosperity, the anonymous faces behind the empire's wealth, living their lives, one laborious day at a time. It's a powerful thought, isn't it? That the mundane, repetitive work of ordinary people built an extraordinary world. As you've explored the bustling docks and the vibrant shops of Ostia, imagining the sheer grind of daily labor, it's crucial to peel back another layer of the city's social fabric. Because, you see, not everyone trundling those heavy sacks of grain, or kneading dough in the bakeries, or even managing a small shop, was what we would simply call a free citizen. The foundation of Ostia's relentless productivity, its very heartbeat, relied heavily on a complex and often poignant social structure, the lives of enslaved people and the intriguing, liminal existence of freedmen. Imagine standing at the docks, the air thick with the smell of brine and sweat, the shouts of stevedores echoing across the water. Among the muscular figures heaving amphorae off ships, you notice men with a particular gait, perhaps a brand mark, or simply the visible exhaustion of a life not their own. These were the enslaved, the human engine of the Roman world, and Ostia, as Rome's port, was a nexus for their labor. They weren't just a small, isolated group. It's a mainstream historical fact that enslaved people constituted a significant portion of the Roman Empire's population, often estimated to be between 10% and 20% of the total, and in cities like Ostia, their presence was even more concentrated, integrated into almost every facet of economic life. They were the muscle on the docks, the hands in the mills, the servants in the grander houses, the assistants in the workshops, and even, sometimes, the skilled artisans producing goods. Their lives, while devoid of freedom, were not a monolithic experience. Some toiled in brutal conditions, their days a relentless cycle of physical exertion under the watchful eye of an overseer. Others, particularly those with specialized skills like accountants, scribes, or even doctors, might have lived lives that, while still unfree, offered a degree of comfort and even influence. It's a strange thought, isn't it? That someone could be owned, yet still be considered an expert in their field, perhaps even managing the finances of their wealthy owner. It's like being the CEO of a company, but your boss also owns your house, your clothes, and could, theoretically, sell you at any moment. Talk about job insecurity. The enslaved arrived in Ostia through various means: prisoners of war, people captured by pirates, children born to enslaved mothers, or even individuals sold into slavery due to debt. They were a commodity, bought and sold, often right there in the bustling Ostian market. You might pass by a small group of newly arrived individuals, their faces etched with uncertainty, being inspected by a potential buyer. The very air of the city, bustling with commerce, carried the unspoken weight of their existence. But the story doesn't end there, because within this system existed a glimmer of hope for some: manumission, the act of being freed. This is where the freedmen enter our narrative, adding another layer of fascinating complexity to Ostia's social ladder. Imagine the sheer relief, the dizzying sense of possibility, when an enslaved person was granted their freedom. It wasn't always a grand, dramatic affair. Sometimes it was a clause in a master's will, sometimes bought through years of diligent saving of a peculium, a small fund an enslaved person might be allowed to accumulate, or sometimes a reward for exceptional loyalty or service. Once freed, they became liberti, freedmen or free women, and their journey was just beginning. They weren't immediately full Roman citizens. They retained certain ties to their former master, who now became their patron. This patron-client relationship meant the freedmen owed their former master respect, occasional services, and political support. Think of it as a lifelong internship where your old boss still expects you to pick up their dry cleaning every now and then, even after you've started your own successful business. It could be a genuinely supportive relationship, or a lingering shadow of servitude, depending on the individuals involved. However, despite these lingering ties, freedmen were often the dynamic heart of Ostia's economy. Many of them had acquired valuable skills during their enslavement. A freedman who had managed his master's warehouse might now set up his own shipping business. A free woman who had overseen the household might open a successful tavern. They were, in many ways, the ultimate self-made entrepreneurs of the ancient world. You see their names on shop signs, on funerary monuments boasting of their achievements, and even in the records of the powerful guilds. Consider the baker who owned the ovens you smelled earlier. He might very well have been a freedman, perhaps having learned his trade while enslaved in a large bakery, then saved enough to buy his freedom, and now runs his own establishment, perhaps even employing his own enslaved people. This is where the social structure gets truly intricate. A freedman, once enslaved, could now be a master himself. It's a testament to the fluidity, or at least the potential for upward mobility, within this seemingly rigid society. Here's a quirky tidbit for you: some freedmen became incredibly wealthy and influential. There are examples of freedmen in Ostia who became ship owners, major merchants, or even held prominent positions in the collegia, the guilds we discussed earlier. One famous example, though not from Ostia itself but representative of the phenomenon, is Trimalchio from Petronius's Satyricon, a fictional but illustrative character of an ostentatious, newly rich freedman who throws lavish, often tasteless, dinner parties. While Trimalchio is a caricature, he reflects a real social phenomenon, the rise of the nouveau riche freedmen, eager to display their hard-won prosperity. Imagine the ancient Roman equivalent of someone who won the lottery and immediately bought a solid gold chariot. Their success was often visible. You'd see their elaborate tombs lining the roads outside Ostia, sometimes even grander than those of some freeborn citizens, a final declaration of their achieved status. They couldn't run for the highest political offices themselves, but their sons, born free, absolutely could. This meant that a family could go from enslaved to free to politically prominent in just 2 generations, a remarkable trajectory for any era. Yet, despite their successes and their crucial economic roles, the social acceptance of freedmen was always a nuanced affair. Historians still argue whether freedmen were truly integrated into Roman society, or if they always remained a distinct, somewhat looked down upon class, regardless of their wealth or achievements. While they could prosper economically, did they ever truly shed the stigma of their past enslavement in the eyes of the old Roman aristocratic families? It's a bit like someone who made their fortune through an unconventional business being invited to the most exclusive country clubs. They might have the money, but do they ever truly belong? So, as you walk through the ruins of Ostia, remember the unseen hands and the complex lives that built and sustained it. The enslaved, whose backbreaking labor was the bedrock of the port, and the freedmen, who, through resilience and entrepreneurial spirit, climbed from the depths of servitude to become the driving force of its commerce. Their stories, often overlooked in the grand narratives of emperors and legions, are the true heartbeat of this ancient, working-class city. They are the echoes of ordinary lives, lived with extraordinary challenges and, for some, extraordinary triumphs, all contributing to the constant, grinding hum of Ostia Antica. You've been with us now, walking the bustling streets of Ostia Antica, feeling the grit of the docks, hearing the clamor of the taverns, and perhaps even smelling the fish market. You've seen this city at its vibrant peak, a testament to human ingenuity and relentless labor, a critical artery pumping life into the very heart of Rome. But like all great things, Ostia's moment in the sun, its golden age of unparalleled prosperity, couldn't last forever. The very forces that birthed it, the river, the sea, the needs of an empire, would eventually conspire to usher in its slow, almost imperceptible decline. It's a bit like watching a grand old tree, majestic in its prime, slowly begin to shed its leaves, not in a sudden storm, but with the quiet, inevitable turning of the seasons. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Tiber, not in the bustling 2nd century, but a century or two later, perhaps in the late 3rd or early 4th century CE. The air still carries the scent of salt and commerce, but there's a subtle difference, isn't there? The river, the lifeblood of Ostia, the very reason for its existence, was also its slow, relentless undoing. You see, the Tiber, for all its beneficence, was a busy river. It carried more than just ships and barges, it carried sediment. Tons and tons of it, washed down from the Apennine Mountains, churned up from its long journey to the sea. Over centuries, this sediment began to accumulate at its mouth, right where Ostia's docks once welcomed the deepest drafted vessels. It wasn't a sudden catastrophe, mind you. No dramatic earthquake swallowed the port whole, nor did a tidal wave sweep it away. Instead, it was a gradual, insidious process. You'd observe the riverbed slowly rising year after year. The water, once deep enough for the largest grain ships, became shallower, forcing them to offload further and further out, or even worse, to wait for higher tides, adding costly delays to their journeys. Think of it like trying to park a supertanker in a kiddie pool. It just doesn't work. The once mighty quinquiremes, those colossal grain carriers, found themselves increasingly struggling to navigate the silting channels. The stevedores, the dockworkers, the men whose muscles had built this city, would have felt the pinch first. Less work, more waiting, more frustration. It's like the Tiber decided it was tired of being a highway and wanted to become a very wide, very slow, very muddy scenic route, much to the chagrin of everyone trying to deliver wheat to Rome. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. Rome's survival depended on a constant, reliable flow of grain from Egypt and North Africa. If Ostia couldn't guarantee that flow, then Rome would simply find another way. And find another way it did. The emperors, ever pragmatic, weren't about to let a silting river jeopardize the capital's food supply. So, enter the new kid on the block, the sleek, modern alternative, Portus. You can almost hear the old Ostians grumbling. Back in my day, we built our own port, by hand, without all these fancy hexagonal basins. But the reality was, innovation was calling. Mainstream historical fact time. Emperor Claudius, in the mid-1st century CE, initiated the construction of a massive artificial harbor complex just north of Ostia, a true deep-water port designed to circumvent the Tiber's increasingly problematic mouth. This was a monumental undertaking, featuring 2 curving moles that embraced the open sea, and even a lighthouse, a beacon of imperial ambition. But even Claudius's grand design eventually faced its own challenges, especially with exposure to storms. Then came Trajan, the emperor who never met a public works project he didn't like, and in the early 2nd century CE, he significantly expanded Portus. He commissioned the iconic hexagonal basin, an engineering marvel that you can still see today, almost perfectly preserved from above. This inner harbor was sheltered, deep, and incredibly efficient. Imagine a vast, calm lake, perfectly designed for ships to dock, load, and unload with unparalleled ease. It was like Ostia was the old dial-up internet, and Portus was the new fiber optic. Nobody wants to wait for their downloads when there's a faster option right next door, especially when those downloads are thousands of tons of life-sustaining grain. The construction of Portus was a direct response to Ostia's growing limitations. Ships could bypass the tricky Tiber altogether, sailing straight into the deep, protected waters of the new harbor. Goods were offloaded there, then transported to Rome via improved road networks, or by smaller barges that could still navigate the Tiber further upstream from Ostia. This wasn't a sudden death knell for Ostia, but a slow, agonizing bleed. The biggest, most lucrative contracts would shift to Portus. The stevedores there would be the busiest, the warehouses there the fullest. The working-class families of Ostia, whose livelihoods were so intimately tied to the rhythm of the port, would have felt the pinch, perhaps moving north to the new opportunities, or seeing their work diminish. It's important to remember that Ostia didn't just vanish overnight. It slowly, gradually faded. For a time, it might have continued to serve as a secondary port, handling smaller vessels or specialized goods. It might have become more of a residential suburb for those working at the new, gleaming portus. But the vibrant, relentless energy that defined its peak began to ebb away. The grand collegia halls, once buzzing with activity and collective purpose, would have seen fewer members, less celebratory banquets, more worried discussions about diminishing returns. The bustling forum of corporations, once a global marketplace, would have grown quieter, the echoes of its past grandeur lingering in the empty arcades. Historians still argue whether the decline of Ostia was primarily due to the environmental challenges of the Tiber's silting, or if the economic advantages and strategic decisions behind the construction of Portus were the more decisive factor in its eventual obsolescence as Rome's main port. It's a bit of a chicken and egg question, isn't it? Did the silting force the creation of Portus, or did Portus simply provide a superior alternative that rendered Ostia obsolete regardless? Perhaps it was a perfect storm, a confluence of both natural and human-made forces. Adding to the complexity, some quirky or fringe tidbits suggest that a combination of factors, including long-term climate changes affecting rainfall patterns and even localized seismic activity that could have altered the riverbed's gradient, might have contributed to the accelerated silting of the Tiber, making it an even more intractable problem for Roman engineers. It paints a picture of a city battling not just economic competition, but the very earth beneath its feet. As the centuries wore on, particularly from the 5th century CE onwards, with the decline of the Western Roman Empire itself, the need for such a massive port infrastructure dwindled further. The population of Rome shrank, its appetite for imported goods lessened, and the grand system that Ostia and Portus served began to unravel. The once proud city, a monument to the working class who built it and kept it running, slowly began to empty. Buildings, once teeming with life, would have fallen into disrepair, their roofs collapsing, their walls crumbling. The sounds of industry would be replaced by the whisper of the wind through empty windows. It's a bit like when your favorite local coffee shop closes because a new, shinier chain opens up down the street, and then the whole neighborhood starts to empty out. You still love the old place, but the latte art just isn't as good anymore, and the Wi-Fi is faster at the new spot, and then, well, there's just less reason to be there at all. This slow, quiet retreat is what preserved Ostia Antica for us today. It wasn't violently destroyed and rebuilt over and over, but rather abandoned to the gentle embrace of sand and time, leaving behind a remarkable snapshot of the daily lives of ordinary Romans, whose legacy we'll reflect upon next. You stand now, not in the bustling port of Ostia at its zenith, but amidst the quiet echoes of what remains. The sun, perhaps, warms your face as it once warmed the faces of countless dockworkers and bakers, its rays filtering through crumbling arches, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air, tiny, silent witnesses to millennia. We've journeyed through the grit and grind of Ostia Antica, from its salty beginnings to its eventual decline, but the true story, the most profound one, isn't just in the rise and fall of a city. It's in the enduring, almost ghostly presence of the ordinary people who called this place home, whose lives, though largely unrecorded in grand histories, whisper from every worn stone. You trace the path of a chariot rut, deeply grooved into the ancient basalt street. Imagine the sheer weight of commerce that passed here, the endless parade of carts laden with grain, oil, wine, and all the necessities for an empire's insatiable appetite. This wasn't the work of emperors or senators. It was the daily, back-breaking labor of men and women who woke before dawn, their hands rough, their backs strong, driven by the simple need to earn a living. Every building you've walked through, every shop, every insula apartment, every public bath, it was all conceived, constructed, and maintained by these very individuals. They were the anonymous architects of daily life, the unsung heroes of the Roman economic engine. Look closely at the brickwork. It's not always perfect, is it? Sometimes a brick is a little crooked, sometimes the mortar uneven. These aren't flaws, they are fingerprints. They are the subtle, imperfect signatures of the masons, the laborers who hauled and laid each one, day after day, year after year. You can almost feel the calluses on their palms, the ache in their shoulders, the simple satisfaction of a wall rising, brick by brick. They weren't building monuments to themselves. They were building homes, warehouses, and shops for their community, for the great machine of Rome. And yet, in their very anonymity, they built something more lasting than many a grand inscription, a tangible, inhabitable history. Consider the small details that survive: a counter in a thermopolium still stained where wine might have spilled, a faint outline of a fish on a mosaic floor in a fishmonger's shop, a worn groove where a door once swung open countless times. These aren't just archaeological features. They are echoes of human interaction. A hurried exchange for a hot meal, the daily haggling over prices, the weary sigh of a shopkeeper at closing time. You can almost hear the clinking of coins, the murmur of conversation, the distant shouts from the docks. It's a symphony of the mundane, a testament to lives lived with purpose, even if that purpose was simply to survive another day and feed a family. One of the most striking aspects of Ostia Antica is how it reveals the sheer scale of the working class in the Roman world. Unlike Pompeii, which offers a snapshot of a relatively affluent resort town, Ostia truly showcases the lives of the plebs, the common folk. It's a mainstream historical fact that at its peak, Ostia's population swelled to an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 people, the vast majority of whom belonged to the working class, supporting the colossal logistical demands of feeding and supplying Rome. Think about that for a moment. Tens of thousands of ordinary people, waking up, going to work, raising families, falling in love, getting annoyed with their neighbors, because some things never change, do they? And then, eventually, resting. Their collective effort was the lifeblood of the city, not the grand pronouncements of emperors. And what about those slightly quirky, almost whimsical details that survive? You might stumble upon a piece of graffiti, not the famous political slogans of Pompeii, but perhaps something simpler, like a crude drawing of a ship, or a tally mark scratched into a wall, a forgotten calculation. Or maybe, if you're particularly lucky, you'd find a small, terracotta oil lamp shaped like an animal, or a child's simple doll, lost centuries ago in a forgotten corner of an insula. These aren't grand artifacts. They are intimate whispers, momentary glimpses into the personal lives of people who worried about the rent, hoped for good health, and perhaps, just perhaps, dreamt of a little more leisure time. You might even find a stray gaming piece, evidence that even after a long, hard day, they still had the energy for a bit of fun, proving that even in ancient times, the human need to unwind was universal. Who knew ancient Romans were just as eager for Netflix and chill after a long day of hauling sacks of grain? The very fabric of Ostia tells a story of community, particularly through its collegia, the guilds we discussed. While these provided a vital social safety net and professional identity, historians still debate the true extent of social mobility for freedmen and the working poor in Roman society, questioning whether the collegia truly offered a path to significant advancement, or merely a supportive social net within their existing class. ***, was it a ladder to climb, or just a more comfortable spot on the same rung? Regardless, these associations provided a sense of belonging, a shared purpose beyond just earning a wage. They were a place to share a meal, to mourn a loss, to celebrate a small victory. They were the ancient equivalent of a community center, a union hall, and a very exclusive club all rolled into one. And let's be honest, probably a place where you could always find someone to complain about the boss with. Even the everyday objects found in Ostia speak volumes. The sheer number of amphory fragments, the worn grinding stones in bakeries, the lead pipes for water, the endless array of tools for carpentry, masonry, and ship repair. These aren't just museum pieces. They are the tangible extensions of human hands, used repeatedly, worn smooth by effort. When you see a large millstone, you can almost feel the rhythmic push and pull of the enslaved or freedmen who labored to grind the grain, day in and day out, ensuring that Rome had its daily bread. It's a powerful, silent narrative of persistence. The legacy of Ostia's working class isn't found in grand monuments built to their names, because such things were reserved for emperors and the elite. Their legacy is in the very ground you walk upon, in the foundations of the buildings, in the sheer scale of the city they enabled. They were the engine, the muscle, the relentless force that made Ostia, and by extension, Rome, function. Their lives were perhaps not glamorous, but they were undeniably vital. They remind us that history isn't just about kings and battles, it's about the countless, ordinary individuals whose daily efforts, repeated over centuries, shaped the world. So, as you mentally step away from the ruins of Ostia Antica, leaving behind the dust and the ghosts of its past, remember this: the enduring legacy of its working-class citizens isn't etched in marble, but in the very earth itself. It's in the worn thresholds, the sturdy walls, the very layout of a city built on their sweat and ingenuity. Their lives, though seemingly forgotten by history's grand narratives, still echo through the ruins today, a quiet, persistent hum of humanity, reminding us that every brick, every step, every whisper of the past was once a vibrant, living moment for someone just like you. And now, as the last echoes of ancient Ostia begin to soften, and the images of its bustling port gently recede, allow your mind to drift. The sun sets, painting the ancient ruins in hues of orange and deep violet, and the cool evening air settles over the quiet stones. The sounds of the day, the imagined shouts of the stevedores, the clatter of carts, the murmur of the market, they all fade into a peaceful hush. You can almost feel the gentle evening breeze, carrying the scent of salt from a distant, ancient sea, a scent that has lingered for millennia. Let your thoughts slow, like the tide receding from the shore, leaving behind a tranquil calm. The ancient world, with its demanding days and its simple joys, now melts into the quiet comfort of your present moment. There's no need to rush, no need to hurry. Just a peaceful rhythm of breath, a gentle wave of relaxation washing over you. The stories of Ostia's working people, their enduring spirit, have woven themselves into the fabric of your understanding, a quiet tapestry of human resilience. As the final images dissolve, leaving only a sense of peace, let yourself sink deeper into the stillness. The day is done, the history told, and now, it's time for quiet rest. Just breathe, and let the gentle currents of sleep carry you away.